Well, welcome again to Morning Coffee. I'm Joe Osamendi, along with my co-host Al Cini.
Nice
And
to be
Al,
here.
this is we're going into my expert series. As you know, we put in Morning Coffee, and we have really two great guests again.
They're real experts.
Real experts in credentialing and certification, which I've been talking to as alternative education to a four-year college.
Very,
type.
very
It's
important.
very important, and we're going. This is part of the Workcred expert series, and what we're going to do today, we're going to have the executive director. Roy Swift from Workcred, and also a very special guest, which will be Cynthia Woodley, who's the Vice President of Professional Testing and a psychometrician, by the way, which is a new word I learned, which we're going to introduce to the audience. And so,
I got questions about
do?
psychometrics.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay, absolutely. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Cynthia and Roy, and welcome to this section of the experts.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good, Roy. Let's start with you. Why don't you talk a little about Workcred and everything, so that our audience can be reacquainted with what Workcred does.
Well, Workcred is designed to look at the quality, market value, and effectiveness of workforce credentials. And it's people like Dr. Woodley that helps build examinations in this country that are fair and reliable and legally defensible, which is important these days, that they discriminate properly. Cindy is a real leader in the United States, but also worldwide, because she works in the International Organization for Standardization and looking at ISO standards that relate to competence of people. And going around to other countries. But here today, she's going to talk about us. And Joe, I think you'll find it very interesting, and the public will find it very interesting, that there are people like Cindy in this world, and maybe Cindy can explain what that word psychometrician means in this country, and what it means for the general public.
Yeah, Roy, I have a question. For people watching who may not be sure what it is we're talking about here, could you give us an example or two of the credential that you've standardized that make a difference in a particular profession?
Well, Workcred doesn't build credentials as such, but Workcred looks at the quality of credentials. But an example might be project management professional that certifies people to do project management. Maybe it's pharmacy technician that they certify pharmacy technicians to work in the pharmacy area. Sometimes it's in the laboratory, laboratory scientist. Sometimes it's supply chain manager. We think that there are over 8,000 certifications in this country that say they certify people to do something.
So that you know for a fact, based on, and that was a question I have for Cynthia. So in order to prove that somebody knows how to do something, all you have to do is ask them a couple of multiple choice questions, right? I mean, that's easy, isn't it?
There's a lot more than asking a couple of multiple choice questions that goes into creating an examination that actually measures what you think it measures, because exams can so easily measure something else than what you're intending to measure. I use the example that if you have a multiple choice question and it has a lot of words in it, are you actually measuring the knowledge in that multiple choice question, or are you measuring reading ability? So it's very easy for other constructs to creep into a multiple choice question. So no, there's so much more that goes into it. I can also jump in, and you asked Roy for an example of a credential that made a difference. In the United States, we have something called food safety managers, and there is a requirement that every restaurant and grocery store that serves food has at least one food safety manager, certified food safety manager on staff. Some jurisdictions require it per shift, some require it per institution or per restaurant. But prior to there being a national standard for certification of food safety managers, and prior to the American National Standards Institute becoming involved in that, it was completely random. Some jurisdictions had nothing and there was no guarantee for safe food. And some jurisdictions had really rigorous requirements. Once a standard came in place and all of the certification bodies worked to bring their exams up to meet that standard, the FDA and the CDC actually issued a document that said it made a difference, that the incidence of foodborne illness went down in the United States after we had a process for making sure our exams were good.
Really important work.
Cynthia, go explain to the viewers exactly what psychometric evaluations are all about, so they can understand what that word really means to them.
Sure. So psychometrics is the study of what it sounds like, psycho ed or skills and what's in the knowledge and what's in your head, and metrics or measurement. So a psychometrician is actually someone who specializes in developing instruments that measure knowledge and skills. And psychometrics is the field of study that revolves around developing instruments that measure knowledge and skills. And most psychometricians have graduate degrees. They're master's and PhD programs in psychometrics. So psychometrics ensures that when you develop an instrument or a test that measures knowledge and skills, that you've actually followed some valid and reliable practices along the way so that the exam, as I said, measures what you think it measures. And those practices start with doing a job analysis to analyze the job, identifying the knowledge and skills, then identifying what's the best way to measure that. We talk about multiple choice, but maybe multiple choice isn't the best way to measure that. Maybe we need a performance exam. If we're going to measure tying your shoes or riding a bicycle, we can ask all the multiple choice questions in the world about how to ride a bicycle or tie your shoes, but unless we see someone doing it, we probably haven't verified they're competent in that. So psychometrics is about determining what's the best way to measure that and to make sure that the instrument that we've created really is a good instrument, and it is legally defensible, as Roy says. It is fair to the candidates, and we make sure that it doesn't discriminate against any particular class of persons. So all of that is what psychometrics is about.
That's, Roy, you mentioned, first of all, it's really important to know that the guy who's flying your airplane, the person who's preparing your food, know what they're doing, because there are safety issues involved. It's not just, there are various aspects of performance that affect the safety of the experience. You want to make sure that gets done right. You mentioned, though, Roy, before the interview, the percentage of certifications that are available commercially that are actually validated against some kind of a criterion that proves they're real. What was that number again?
We think there's over 8,000, but only 10 to 15% are accredited by a third party that says that they have met a certain standard. Cindy and I both worked on in fact, Cindy chaired it, the committee in Geneva, Switzerland, that created the ISO standard to credit certification bodies, and it's a high-level standard, and it involves a paper review as well as on-site visit in this regard. The problem these days is that the word certification is somewhat meaningless at times. Somebody says, "Oh, I've been certified," and they took a course, and then they took an exam at the end of the course, and they said they were certified. Well, we know that that is not a true blue certification. The certification is firewalled away from education as a third-party assessment. It's time limited. You have to renew it by some sort of recertification, and it can be taken away for either unethical behavior or incompetence. And the other thing that the audience should know about credentials is that generally we consider what they call the three-legged stool to be the most rigorous of professions when they say they're going to take somebody. And the three-legged stool is that there's an academic preparation of some sort, there is some sort of clinical or performance evaluation, and then there is that third-party assessment tool in that regard.
You know, one of the things that's so important, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Joe is certifiable, but that's something different, right? Did you guys hear that? Joe is certifiable, but that's something different from.
Yes, that's something.
Okay, yeah. That was funny, by the way. Well, maybe not to everybody.
Not to everybody.
Go on, Joe.
Cindy, when we talked before, what is so important about what testing does and everything is, every exam and the testing really will measure the individual's skills and the value of the individual, and that's why it's so important to develop an exam and testing that's valid.
That's correct, because a lot of times these credentials are the gateway to getting a job. So particularly when we think about licensure, you cannot actually get a job unless you pass the exam. So it's so critical that these exams measure what is important, the knowledge and the skills important to do the job, because they can hold somebody back from getting a job or hold somebody back from a promotion.
Yeah, as you said, I mean, just being able to read something and getting an exam correct does not measure the skills of that individual. And that's exactly what you're making sure of, is the exam is correct in measuring those skills so that person can get the job that they want or they're qualified for.
Correct. And, one of the terms that we've mentioned, you've heard the term fair, valid, reliable, and legally defensible. One of the terms is valid, so validity. And validity is about whether that exam actually measures the knowledge and skills related to the exam. You can imagine that it's so easy for other knowledge and skills that don't relate to the job to creep in. For example, if we have a trainer or if we have a manager of a job tell us what's important to do the job, maybe that's actually not what's important. Maybe the person on the job doesn't actually do those things. Mm-hmm. So we want incumbent workers to tell us what it is that they do on the job and then to identify those knowledge and skills, because somebody else can't tell you what you actually do on the job. Only the person who holds the job can tell you. So part of psychometrics is determining what is it that you do? What do you need to do that job?
That's important to know.
Right. And absolutely, and also we certainly want to get diversity, equality, and inclusion in all these things too. So, it's so important. It's so important to get this testing right. It really is, Alan, to make sure these examinations are done correctly. Cynthia, would you tell us a little bit about your background too, and how you got involved in this whole psychometrics thing?
So, sure. I actually got involved through a university. I was working at a university, but the way I got involved was the development of teacher certification exams, and that led me to the world of exam development. And then I got more involved with professional credentialing, like what Workcred does, which is both exams at the end of certificate programs and exams related to certification. So the company that I work for, Professional Testing, it provides outsourced services to certification bodies, because most certification bodies do not have an expert on staff to help them develop an exam correctly. They don't have a psychometrician on staff. Mm-hmm. And when I'm talking about certification bodies, I'm talking about professional credentialing bodies like boards, professional associations, anyone who's going to award a credential that says, I as an organization, I'm attesting that this person has X body of knowledge and skills. Most of those certification bodies do not have a psychometrician on staff, so they rely on experts and companies such as myself and others, such as Professional Testing and other companies like Professional Testing, to help them develop fair, valid, reliable, and legally defensible exam programs.
Great.
And what's so important about what you do in credentialing and certifications are, with the workforce now, people have to get in and have to be retrained in a lot of instances. People that came from the military have to take those skills and translate them into the private sector, which is important. And you want to make sure that the right people are in the right jobs.
It's really important.
And it's so important because certification right now, as Roy said, there's not a lot of accreditations going around. So you have to make sure that we're getting accreditation and the certifications that really count for something. And that's exactly what your company does, Cynthia.
And I think the bottom line is, if you are a person that wants to get a job, and let's say you don't want to invest the time or the money to get a higher education degree, university degree, but you want to fast track to a job, mm-hmm. having a certification is one way to get there quicker. But you have to have a valid certification. It can't be a certification that you just paid some money and they gave you a certificate, and now you are attesting that you're certified, as was said, but nobody actually verified you had knowledge and skills. So a lot of the public and a lot of students do not know how to distinguish a valid certificate from one that's not valid. And they get harmed by spending money, and sometimes lots of money, on a fraudulent certificate. So it's really important to take a look at what makes a quality credential or a quality certification. And as Roy mentioned, accreditation is a really big part of that. It's not just about getting a certification from a certification body. It's about getting an accredited certification from a certification body. No different than it is to go to an accredited university and to go to a non-accredited university.
That's a great point. And also, recertification is so important too. Would you like to address that a little bit?
Yeah, as Roy mentioned, certification, one of the definitions of certification is it's time limited. And it's time limited because when we offer a certificate to someone as part of certification, we verify that they have the knowledge and skills for competent performance. But who knows whether they stay competent over time? And so therefore, certification requires that you recheck every so often that the person still has the knowledge and skills to be competent. And how often is that? Well, it depends on what the credential is. If it's something in a highly changing environment like an IT certification, then obviously the recheck or recertification will be more frequent. If it's something that doesn't change as often, maybe it can be less frequent, 5 years, 6 years, or longer. So the only way for a certification body to verify that the person is still competent is to go back and check to make sure that they're still competent. So that's what recertification is about.
That's the reason it's very important for the public to, when an employer is going to hire somebody, it may be that they had a certification last month, but the next month it may have been taken away from them, or they didn't renew. And so it's a dynamic situation. So if somebody is looking at somebody to be hired, then they should check. You can call the certification body and they will do what they call a verification of that certification. But it is dynamic, so you have to make sure that you are up to date and understand that they may have it one day and may not have it the next day. It's not like a degree. You know, we have our degrees for our life. Nobody can take them away from us. We've got them. But certification is not that way.
Well,
This is, you know, I want to say when a company offers training that leads to a certification that the company provides, there's market pressure on making sure that the customer passes the certification training experience. Without accreditation, you're going to want to give everybody an A because after all, that's what they bought. They bought the certification. What I love about what you guys are doing is that you're changing up the industry and saying, when we say you must be this tall to ride this ride, we really mean it. These are things you need to be able to demonstrate in order, before you can go out and call yourself this, you need to be able to prove that you can actually do this. It sounds revolutionary. It shouldn't sound revolutionary, but it is.
right. That's one of the reasons we created the expert series on certification and credentialing, because it is so important.
It's critical. It's gigantic.
It's dynamic, and also the fact is that certifications are growing. As you said, Roy, we're getting more accreditations and we're getting more certifications that really have more validity. And companies like Protesting Corporation are really leading the way for that. And you know, I'm so happy to have you guys on again because I think it's an important thing for our viewers to understand more about certification.
I think we want to keep talking about
and the
this.
validity, and we're always going to keep talking about
It's important.
Exactly. So Dr. Cynthia Woodley and Roy, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we hope we will see you again.
Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Pleasure. And